What happens when the very people you trusted to carry on your legacy betray you from within, plotting to tear everything down? Eleanor Brooks, the founder of a billion-dollar empire, went undercover as a janitor to expose the shocking truth. What she uncovered will leave you speechless. In the heart of Chicago, beneath the towering skyline that was a testament to power and progress, there existed a quiet giant, Brooks Innovations. For over 3 decades, it had stood as a beacon of hope in the corporate world, a shining example of what could be achieved when vision met determination. But what the world didn't know was that behind the polished glass doors of this financial technology empire, a storm was brewing, one that could bring everything crashing down. At the helm of this empire was Eleanor Brooks, a woman whose very name had become synonymous with success and integrity in the business world. A black woman in an industry dominated by men, Eleanor had fought tirelessly to build Brooks Innovations from the ground up. She started with nothing, no family fortune, no connections, but what she did have was an unshakable belief in herself and a relentless work ethic. It was a battle every day, and yet she pushed forward, always ahead of the curve, always breaking barriers. In the early years, when doors slammed in her face and doors of opportunity were locked tight, Eleanor didn't just knock, she kicked them down. She poured everything she had into building this company, enduring sleepless nights, endless challenges, and the weight of a world that told her she couldn't succeed because of her gender and the color of her skin. But Eleanor never gave in to those voices. She built Brooks Innovations into a multi-billion-dollar corporation, a leader in the fintech world, known not only for its innovation, but for its commitment to equality and social justice. It wasn't just a company, it was a legacy, a testament to her fight for equality in a world that often overlooked people like her. But as the years passed and the company grew, Eleanor knew it was time to pass on the mantle. At 62, she felt she had done enough. She had poured her soul into Brooks Innovations, and now it was time for the next generation to take over. Her son, Jonathan Brooks, was the obvious choice. A brilliant young man, well-educated, well-trained, and full of potential. Eleanor had mentored him for years, teaching him not just the business, but the core values of respect, fairness, and innovation that had defined her own leadership. It was time for him to carry on the torch. The transition seemed seamless, almost too easy. Jonathan, having graduated from Harvard and armed with a deep understanding of his mother's vision, stepped into the role of CEO. He had big shoes to fill, but Eleanor was confident in his abilities. After all, he had watched her lead, absorbed her lessons, and was ready to lead the company into the future. Or so she thought. The first few months were promising. Jonathan made waves with his fresh approach, introducing new initiatives and plans to modernize Brooks Innovations. But as time went on, Eleanor began to feel uneasy. It was subtle at first, a gut feeling that something wasn't quite right. She started hearing whispers, rumors of discontent, of managers who were once her trusted allies beginning to act differently. At first, she brushed it off. Jonathan had to find his way after all, but then, as the months wore on, the whispers grew louder. There were murmurs of senior leaders, people she had trusted with the company's future, acting with increasing arrogance, disregarding the values that had once been at the core of the company. Victor Daniels, the operations manager, was now dictating terms to employees with a sense of entitlement that Eleanor had never witnessed under her leadership. Richard Foster, the marketing director, was known for his sharp business acumen, but now he seemed to use his position to belittle employees, particularly those in lower ranks. Eleanor had always believed in treating everyone with respect, but Richard's behavior was sending shockwaves through the company. Then there was Paula Harris, the vice president of business operations, who had once been Eleanor's confidant, a trusted advisor. But now, Paula seemed more interested in playing power games than in fostering the collaborative, inclusive culture Eleanor had worked so hard to create. Eleanor had always admired Paula's ambition, but she began to see a darker side, a side that sought to manipulate situations for personal gain. Perhaps most unsettling of all was Linda Baker, the head of human resources, a woman who had always been the firm but fair protector of the company's values. Now, Linda seemed indifferent to the complaints coming from the lower levels. Her silence spoke volumes. Eleanor couldn't ignore it anymore. The fabric of the company was beginning to fray, and her son, despite his best efforts, was powerless to stop it. But what really shook Eleanor was the conversation she overheard one evening when she visited the headquarters unannounced. She had dropped by to check on the state of the company, something she did occasionally out of habit. As she walked past the executive offices on the 42nd floor, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. It was Victor, Richard, and Paula, and they were discussing Jonathan's leadership, or rather, their disdain for it. "He's too soft." Victor's voice was sharp and filled with contempt. "He doesn't have what it takes to lead this company. We need someone who knows how to get things done. Someone who isn't afraid to make the hard decisions." Richard's voice joined in, the sarcasm dripping from his words. "If he keeps running the company this way, we'll be out of business in no time. We need to take control before it's too late." Paula's voice was quieter, but just as venomous. "We'll make sure Jonathan is out of the picture. Once he's gone, I'll take over as CEO. It's the only way we'll get things back on track." The words hit Eleanor like a punch to the gut. She had known something was wrong, but hearing it so clearly, hearing the plot to undermine her son, to take her company, was more than she could bear. The company she had built with her blood, sweat, and tears was being sabotaged from within, and the very people she had entrusted to carry on her legacy were the ones orchestrating its destruction. Eleanor's heart ached as the weight of the betrayal settled on her shoulders. She had built Brooks Innovations to be a company that stood for something greater than profit. It was about the people, the employees who worked tirelessly every day, the ones who had supported her vision, the ones who believed in the company's mission. But now, those people were being betrayed, and Eleanor could not stand idly by and watch it all fall apart. She realized then that she could no longer trust the company to anyone else. The betrayal was too deep, and her son, Jonathan, too young and inexperienced to face it alone. The company she had built, the legacy she had created, was slipping through her fingers. Eleanor's once quiet sense of unease had now grown into a burning desire to set things right. The decision came to her in that moment. If she wanted to save Brooks Innovations, she would have to take matters into her own hands. No more sitting on the sidelines, watching as everything she had fought for was dismantled piece by piece. She would go back to the company she had founded, but this time, she would do so in the shadows. Eleanor Brooks, the legendary CEO, was about to return to Brooks Innovations, but she would do so as Janet, a lowly janitor. No one would know who she truly was. She would walk among the very people who had betrayed her and her son, observe them, gather the evidence she needed, and confront the cancer that had taken root in the very company she had worked so hard to build. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let her legacy slip away without a fight. Eleanor stood in the small, dimly lit mirror of her apartment, adjusting the janitor's uniform. The heavy weight of the decision she had made pressed against her chest. The transformation was more than just physical. It was a surrender of her power, a humbling act that felt almost unnatural. She, the founder of Brooks Innovations, was about to become an invisible figure in her own company, a nameless face among the many who worked quietly in the shadows, unnoticed, unheard. Her reflection in the mirror was a stark contrast to the woman she had once been. She remembered the sharp suits, the confident stride down the hallways of Brooks Innovations as CEO, the room full of executives hanging on her every word. But now, she was just Janet, an ordinary janitor, a role she had never imagined herself playing in the midst of all she had built. Yet, despite the surreal nature of the situation, Eleanor felt something stirring inside her. Determination, not defeat. This was not a step backward. It was a step into the heart of the problem she had to confront. The company she had created, the company that had once stood as a pillar of innovation and fairness, was now being eaten from the inside out by greed, arrogance, and betrayal. She could no longer afford to be a distant observer. She needed to see the truth with her own eyes, feel the pain of her employees firsthand, and bring back the values that had once made Brooks Innovations great. Her heart pounded as she left her apartment and drove to the headquarters, a sleek, towering building that now felt more like a monument to something lost than a testament to achievement. It had been months since she had walked through those front doors with confidence, but now the building felt cold, unwelcoming, a reminder of how far things had fallen since Jonathan took the reins. When Eleanor arrived, she could feel the weight of the moment. The lobby, once a place of hustle and excitement, now felt eerily quiet, almost sterile. She slipped past the security desk with barely a glance, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and resolve. She had come here under the guise of a janitor, and she would remain hidden, unnoticed, an invisible witness to the decay happening right under her nose. The first night was strange. The halls were quieter than she remembered. The gleaming floors of the building now seemed untouched by the energy that used to pulse through them. Eleanor had always prided herself on creating a culture of respect and warmth, but as she walked the halls that night, she could sense the emptiness, the coldness that had taken root in the company's very bones. It was difficult, to say the least. As Janet, she was invisible to most of the employees. They passed her by without a second thought, treating her as just another face in the crowd, someone whose job was to stay out of sight. This was exactly what Eleanor wanted, of course. She needed to observe unnoticed, to witness the truth without interference. But it was more painful than she could have imagined. She had always believed in the power of personal connection, in building relationships that went beyond the office walls, and yet now she was invisible. She began with the lower floors, the offices and hallways where most of the janitorial staff worked. The routine was simple: clean the floors, tidy up the spaces, and keep her head down. It was a role she had never imagined herself playing in the high rise that had once been the center of her empire. But as the night wore on, Eleanor found herself sinking deeper into her role. The silence of the office was unnerving. The hum of fluorescent lights felt alien, a far cry from the bright, vibrant energy that used to fill the halls. Then came the moment that would change everything. Around midnight, as she was mopping the floor in the hallway near the executive offices, she saw him. Victor Daniels, the operations manager, was walking down the hallway with a swagger in his step, his shiny shoes clicking against the polished floor. Eleanor recognized him immediately. He had once been a trusted ally, someone she had relied on to manage the day-to-day operations of the company. But now, as he strutted down the hall, she could sense the change in him, his arrogance, his disregard for the very employees who made the company run. Victor stopped right in front of her. He looked down at Eleanor with a condescending sneer, his eyes filled with contempt. "What do you think you're doing, old lady?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with mockery. "You missed a spot over there. We don't pay you to take your time, do we?" He gestured to the floor, and without waiting for her response, he stepped right over the area she had just cleaned, deliberately leaving muddy footprints in his wake. Eleanor clenched her jaw, refusing to let the insult show on her face. She quietly grabbed her mop and started again, wiping away the footprints, but the sting of his words was hard to ignore. This man, this once loyal employee, had become the embodiment of everything she had fought against in building Brooks Innovations: greed, power, and a complete lack of respect for those who worked behind the scenes. As Victor walked away, Eleanor's grip tightened on the mop. He had no idea that the woman he had just humiliated wasn't just some frail janitor. She was the woman who had founded this company, the one who had built it from the ground up. And now she was going to bring it all back. But first, she had to see the truth, the full extent of the rot that had taken hold. The next few days blurred into one. Eleanor worked long hours, scrubbing, sweeping, and observing, all the while collecting pieces of the puzzle that would lead to the truth. She saw how Richard Foster treated the employees, barking orders at them and making them feel small. He was once known for his charisma and sharp business sense, but now he was using his power to intimidate and belittle those beneath him. Paula Harris was no better. Eleanor witnessed her berating a junior staff member in front of the whole office, humiliated them for making a small mistake. Paula had always been ambitious, but now that ambition was tainted with cruelty. She didn't care about the people, just about moving up the corporate ladder. She wanted power, and she was willing to tear down anyone who stood in her way. It was Linda Baker, the head of HR, however, who disturbed Eleanor the most. Linda had been Eleanor's trusted confidant, the one person who always had the employees' best interests at heart. But now, she turned a blind eye to the complaints that filtered in from the lower levels. When Eleanor overheard a conversation between Linda and one of the managers, she realized just how deeply the corruption had set in. Linda wasn't just complicit, she was actively enabling it. The more Eleanor observed, the more she understood the depth of the crisis. It wasn't just a few bad apples, it was the entire system that had been corrupted. The company she had fought for, the company that had once stood for fairness, had been hijacked by those who sought only personal gain. It was heartbreaking. It was devastating. But Eleanor knew that this was only the beginning. She had to gather the evidence, expose the truth, and confront those who were destroying everything she had worked for. The long hours passed, and Eleanor's resolve only grew stronger. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She would be met with resistance. She would face opposition from those who didn't want the truth to come out. But she had to keep going. For Jonathan, for the employees, and for the soul of Brooks Innovations. She would bring back what had been lost, even if it meant risking everything. The future of the company depended on it. The days blurred together for Eleanor. Every night she donned her janitor's uniform and quietly worked through the company's hallways, sweeping, mopping, and scrubbing every corner of the building. But her mind was never on the menial tasks in front of her. Her focus was on the whispers she'd overheard, on the backroom dealings, on the betrayal unfolding within the walls of the company she had founded. She had known that something was wrong for months, but it was only now, in the shadows of anonymity, that she truly began to see the rot that had set in. The first signs of the betrayal had come from the whispers of employees, the ones who had once walked the halls with pride. They spoke of the arrogance of the new management, of the growing distance between the upper and lower ranks, and of the oppressive atmosphere that had taken over. But it was not until Eleanor began to observe them firsthand that the full extent of the conspiracy became clear. The actions of Victor Daniels, Richard Foster, Paula Harris, and Linda Baker were no longer just rumors. They had crossed the line from casual power struggles to calculated betrayal. What had once been an honorable company, a place where people from all walks of life had found opportunity, had become a breeding ground for corruption, greed, and self-interest. Eleanor could feel it in the air, the sickening realization that the very people she had trusted with her dream were now conspiring to destroy it. As she spent night after night working in silence, her eyes became accustomed to the hidden world she was now a part of. No longer just an outsider looking in, Eleanor saw everything. The way the senior managers interacted with each other and with the employees. She saw how they manipulated situations, how they quietly shifted power in their favor, and how they systematically broke down the company's values with every passing day. Victor, Once the reliable operations manager who had kept the company running smoothly, was now a man consumed by his own ambition. He had always been confident, but now his arrogance was a weapon he used to intimidate and control. Eleanor watched him bully employees in the hallways, belittle them with cruel remarks, and fire people on a whim, all in an effort to assert his dominance. He no longer cared about the company's welfare. It was all about him now. But Victor was only the beginning. Richard Foster, the once charismatic marketing director, had become a puppet master, pulling strings behind the scenes to secure his own place at the top. Eleanor watched as he manipulated situations to his advantage, using employees as pawns in his game. He was charming when he wanted to be, a master of influence, but Eleanor knew the truth. Beneath the polished exterior, he was no different from the others. He too was complicit in the slow death of the company she had worked so hard to build. And then there was Paula Harris, the vice president of business operations. Eleanor had always respected Paula for her strategic mind and ambition, but as she watched her now, she realized that ambition had turned to greed. Paula had stopped caring about the company's mission. It was no longer about equality, innovation, or respect. It was about her personal rise to power. Eleanor had seen her destroy the careers of those who got in her way, lying and manipulating the board to secure her position. Paula was ruthless, and she had no hesitation in pushing anyone aside to get what she wanted. Linda Baker, the head of human resources, was perhaps the most shocking of all. Eleanor had trusted Linda completely. She had been her confidant, her right hand in ensuring that the company's culture remained strong. But now, Linda was the one turning a blind eye to the mounting problems. Eleanor overheard her in meetings, speaking in hushed tones, covering up incidents of mistreatment, and ignoring the pleas of employees who were too afraid to speak out. Linda was no longer the ally she had once been. She was complicit, a willing participant in the destruction of everything Eleanor had built. It was in these long, lonely nights that Eleanor realized the depth of the betrayal. These weren't just a few bad apples. This was a coordinated effort to take control of Brooks' innovations. And Jonathan, her son, was the ultimate target. She had heard them talk about him, about how he was too weak, too naive to lead the company. They had plans to take him down, to push him out and take the reins for themselves. The realization hit Eleanor like a ton of bricks. They weren't just trying to ruin the company. They were trying to erase her legacy and replace it with their own. One evening, as Eleanor worked quietly in the corner of the executive floor, she overheard something that made her blood run cold. She had been cleaning near the conference room when she heard the voices of Victor, Richard, Paula, and Linda, a conversation that would change everything. Eleanor's heart raced as she listened, her body frozen in place. "We can't afford to wait any longer." Victor's voice was low but filled with urgency. "Jonathan is too weak. We need him gone before he does any more damage. The board is already questioning his decisions." Paula's voice followed, cold and calculating. "He doesn't have the backbone to lead this company. If we want real power, we need to step in now. I'll take over as CEO. I know I can do this better than he ever could." Linda's voice was almost dismissive. "We've already set the wheels in motion. The board will have no choice but to agree once we present the right evidence. We can take control, but we need Jonathan to step down." Richard joined in, his tone sharp. "Jonathan's too focused on values, too caught up in trying to do the right thing. The company needs someone who understands the real game. We've been waiting long enough. It's time to act." Eleanor's stomach churned as she listened to the plan unfold. These people she had trusted, were plotting to overthrow her son, to take everything she had worked for and turn it into their own playground. She could feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. But in that moment, something inside her snapped. She had to act. She could no longer sit by in silence. Her mind raced as she pieced together everything she had heard and witnessed over the past few weeks. The manipulation, the lies, the greed. It all came together in a horrific truth. Brooks Innovations, her company, was being hijacked by the very people who were supposed to uphold its values. They had no loyalty to the company, to its mission, or to Jonathan. They only cared about their own ambitions. Eleanor knew that she had to expose them, but she needed concrete evidence. Everything she had gathered so far, the whispers, the incidents, the subtle power plays, was circumstantial. She needed something undeniable, something that would force the board to act. The following days were filled with a quiet intensity. Eleanor worked with a new purpose, gathering everything she could: documents, recordings, accounts from employees who had been too afraid to speak out. She meticulously pieced together the puzzle of betrayal, knowing that the time was drawing near. She could feel it. Everything was building to a confrontation, a reckoning that would shake Brooks Innovations to its core. When she finally gathered enough evidence, Eleanor knew it was time. She had watched long enough, she had seen enough. The truth had to come to light, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The company that had once been her pride and joy was now on the brink of collapse, not because of failure, but because of betrayal. The very people she had trusted to carry on her vision had become the architects of its downfall, and it was up to her to stop them, to expose the truth, and to protect the legacy of Brooks Innovations before it was too late. The weight of what Eleanor was about to do pressed heavily on her chest. Every night, after hours of cleaning the corporate halls that had once been her domain, she would return to her small apartment with the burden of knowledge she could not ignore. She had gathered the pieces of the puzzle, the whispers, the manipulations, the lies, and now it was time to expose the truth that would shatter everything. She had seen it all. The betrayal of her son, Jonathan Brooks, the company she had poured her heart and soul into, the dream that had once been her life's work. The plan to replace her, to erase everything she had built in the name of power and greed, was more real than she could have ever imagined. The people she had trusted, Victor Daniels, Richard Foster, Paula Harris, and Linda Baker, had been plotting to take control, to destroy Jonathan, and to make Brooks Innovations their own. It was a conspiracy of the highest order, and it was time to confront it. The day of reckoning had arrived. Eleanor sat in front of her small desk, the weight of the USB drive in her hands. Inside that drive lay all the evidence she needed: the recordings, the documents, the plans they had made behind closed doors. It was irrefutable. They had betrayed the company, her son, and her legacy. She had no more doubts. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment that would change everything. She could feel the quiet hum of the city outside her window, the same city where she had built her empire. Chicago, a city known for its skyscrapers and business giants, had once been the city where Brooks Innovations stood as a beacon of hope for the underserved, a testament to what could be accomplished with hard work and a belief in the value of equality. But now, the city seemed like a distant memory, a reminder of what had been lost in the pursuit of power. Eleanor took one last look at the familiar, though now alien, surroundings of her apartment. The quiet comfort of the place that had once been a sanctuary for her thoughts and her dreams now felt like the calm before the storm. She had already made up her mind. She was going to confront Victor, Richard, Paula, and Linda. The time for whispers and shadows was over. It was time to bring the truth into the light. With the USB drive safely tucked into her coat pocket, Eleanor made her way to Brooks Innovations. She walked past the same entrance she had used for years, but this time, it felt different. This time, she wasn't the founder and CEO. This time, she was Janet, the lowly janitor, an invisible figure in the company she had created. But even in her disguise, Eleanor knew her presence would not go unnoticed when the time came. As she entered the building, her heart raced, but it wasn't fear, it was determination. She knew the stakes, the future of Brooks Innovations hung in the balance. She couldn't allow it to be destroyed by the very people she had trusted to help carry it forward. The company was quiet this late at night, the sounds of office workers and executives long gone. Eleanor moved swiftly, her footsteps echoing through the vast corridors that once rang with the energy of progress and innovation. She made her way up to the top floor, where the boardroom waited. The same room where important decisions had been made for years, where deals had been struck, where the future had been planned. Now, it would be the site of a confrontation that would change everything. Eleanor paused outside the door to the boardroom. She could hear voices from within, but it was Victor's voice that stood out, sharp, filled with confidence. "We have to act now," he said, his tone unwavering. "Jonathan's too weak. He won't be able to handle what's coming. The board will see that, and once he's out, the company is ours." Eleanor felt a chill run through her. The betrayal, the corruption, it was all so real. But this was it, the moment of truth. With a deep breath, she stepped forward and opened the door. The room went silent. Victor, Richard, Paula, and Linda all looked up in shock, their eyes wide with confusion. Jonathan was sitting at the head of the table, his posture stiff, as though he too was waiting for something to happen. He hadn't seen her, didn't recognize her, yet. Eleanor's eyes swept across the room. There they were, the very people who had schemed behind her back, who had plotted to take her son's future, to dismantle the company she had worked so hard to build. The weight of the betrayal pressed heavily on her, but she knew she had come here for one reason: to confront them and bring everything into the open. "Janet," Victor sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "What are you doing here? This is a private meeting." Eleanor stepped into the room, her gaze unwavering, her heart steady. She wasn't here as a janitor. She was here as Eleanor Brooks, the founder of this company, the woman who had fought to create a space of respect, innovation, and equality. The woman who had trusted these people. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "I'm not here to clean," she said, her words steady, full of quiet power. "I'm here to make sure the truth comes out, all of it." The room was silent. Jonathan looked up at her, his brow furrowed, confusion and curiosity written across his face. But Eleanor didn't look at him. She kept her focus on the four betrayers seated at the table. "You think you can take control of this company, don't you?" Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. "You think you can oust my son and destroy everything I've built, all for your own gain." Victor shot to his feet, his face reddening with anger. "What the hell are you talking about?" he spat. "You don't know what you're saying." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying," Eleanor replied, her voice calm but laced with an undeniable fury. She turned to Richard. "I know how you've manipulated employees for your own gain, making promises you had no intention of keeping." She faced Paula next. "And you, Paula, how you've stepped on others to climb your way to the top, abandoning everything that once made this company great." Finally, Eleanor turned to Linda, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of sorrow and disgust. "And you, Linda, once my most trusted ally, now complicit in every lie and every injustice that has been allowed to fester here." The room was still, the air thick with tension. The evidence Eleanor had gathered over the past weeks, the recordings, the documents, the conversations she had overheard, now sat on the table in front of her, a USB drive that held the truth. She plugged it into the boardroom computer and the screen flickered to life. The recordings began to play. Victor's voice, Richard's scheming, Paula's manipulations, Linda's silence. Every word, every detail was captured in crystal clear audio and video. The conspiracy was laid bare before their eyes. Eleanor stood tall as the room watched the evidence unfold. She had waited for this moment, and now the truth could not be denied. She turned to Jonathan, who was still frozen in place, his face pale as he listened to the voices of the very people who had tried to destroy him. "They've been plotting to take you down, Jonathan," Eleanor said softly. "They wanted to destroy everything we've built, everything I've worked for, and they've done it all behind your back." For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the truth hung in the air, but then Victor broke the silence, his voice trembling with panic. "You can't do this! You can't expose us! We built this company!" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You destroyed it. You betrayed the people who made this company what it is. And now it ends." Jonathan stood up, his face a mix of disbelief and anger. His eyes locked onto Victor, Richard, Paula, and Linda, the people who had tried to take everything from him, to erase the legacy his mother had built. "Get out," Jonathan said, his voice cold, his tone resolute. "Now." The four of them stood in stunned silence for a moment, realizing that their game had come to an end. They had no more power here. They were no longer in control. As they left the room, heads bowed in defeat, Jonathan turned to Eleanor, his face full of gratitude and shock. "Mom, I don't know what to say." Eleanor smiled softly, her eyes filled with pride. "You don't need to say anything, Jonathan. The truth speaks for itself." With that, Brooks Innovations began to heal. The rot had been exposed, the truth had come to light, and the future of the company was secure. Eleanor had protected her legacy and her son, and in doing so, she had reminded everyone that the greatest power lay not in ambition or manipulation, but in integrity, truth, and love. The aftermath of that stormy night in the boardroom was as still as the calm after a hurricane. The echoes of betrayal, the shattering of trust, the exposure of years of quiet manipulation and power grabs. Everything had been laid bare. As the sun rose the following morning, it bathed the glass and steel of Brooks Innovations in a golden light that felt almost surreal. The company that had once been the pride of its founder, Eleanor Brooks, now stood at the precipice of change. What had once been a beacon of equality and innovation was at a crossroads, a company fighting for its soul. The following days were filled with a mix of quiet resolve and unspoken grief. Jonathan Brooks, the son who had inherited the legacy of the company, sat in his office, staring out at the city that had seen the rise of his mother's empire. He was still trying to process everything that had happened, the shock of what he had learned, the betrayal that had been hidden from him by the people he had trusted the most. But despite the pain and the weight of his responsibility, there was one thing that had become clear to him. This company, Brooks Innovations, could still be saved. The rot that had taken root could be purged, but it would require more than just firing a few bad apples. It would take something deeper, something that had been lost over time, something he had almost forgotten in the rush of growing the company into a global powerhouse. It would take values. It would take integrity. It would take a return to the heart of the company that his mother had founded. Eleanor, too, was still coming to terms with the enormity of what had transpired. Her heart ached for the betrayal, for the trust that had been shattered. But she also felt a deep, unshakable pride in the way her son had stood up to those who had tried to tear their world apart. Her son, who had once been a young boy running through the hallways of this very building, now stood as the man who would lead it into the future. It was his time, and she knew that he was ready. The question was, what kind of future would he create? What kind of company would he lead? The answer would not be found in the power struggles or the manipulations of the past. It would be found in the vision that Eleanor had held all those years ago, the vision of a company that truly valued its people, a company that saw every employee as vital to its success, not just as a means to an end. A company that understood that progress was not just about profits, but about lifting people up, about breaking barriers, about doing things the right way, even when it wasn't the easy way. And so began the long and arduous process of rebuilding. Jonathan sat in the office that had once been his mother's, now his own, the weight of leadership heavier than ever. He thought back to the many lessons Eleanor had taught him, lessons about integrity, about the importance of treating people with respect, about how leadership was not about power, but about service. He thought of the way she had always cared for the company's employees, how she had fought for them as much as for the company's bottom line. These were the values that had made Brooks Innovations what it was, and these were the values that would bring it back to life. The first step was acknowledging the damage that had been done, not just by the betrayals of Victor, Richard, Paula, and Linda, but by the culture they had fostered. Brooks Innovations had grown into a well-oiled machine, but somewhere along the way, it had lost its soul. Employees had become cogs in a wheel, treated as expendable, their voices drowned out by the weight of the corporate ladder. It was a culture of fear and control, a culture where the powerful preyed on the weak, and where the very people who had helped build the company were now the ones who were oppressed. Jonathan knew that this had to change. He could no longer allow the company to operate in a way that silenced the voices of those who mattered most. He needed to restore the trust that had been broken, to give the employees the power they had once had, to make them feel valued once more. He needed to bring back the culture of respect and fairness that had once been the heart of Brooks Innovations. But that wouldn't be easy. The board of directors, still shaken by the events of the past week, convened to discuss the future of the company. It was a tense meeting, the room filled with whispers and wary glances. Some members were still loyal to the old guard, to the people who had been in power for so long. But Jonathan was firm. He knew what had to be done. He began by laying out a vision for the future, a vision where Brooks Innovations would not just be a leader in the financial technology space, but a leader in how businesses could be run ethically, with integrity, and with a deep commitment to fairness. It was a bold vision, one that would challenge the very foundations of the company, but Jonathan was unwavering. He had seen the destruction that came from greed and manipulation. He had seen what happened when power was used to control rather than empower. And he was determined that Brooks Innovations would not be that kind of company anymore. The first order of business was to completely overhaul the company's leadership structure. Those who had betrayed the company, those who had been complicit in the destruction of its values, would be removed from their positions. It wasn't just about punishing them, it was about clearing out the old systems that had allowed corruption to flourish. Jonathan knew that the company needed fresh leadership, a leadership that would place people, not profits, at the center of everything. But removing the bad apples was just the beginning. Jonathan also wanted to bring back the voice of the employees, the heart of the company. He instituted new policies that allowed employees at all levels to provide feedback, to report injustices, and to be heard. No longer would the voices of the workers be silenced. No longer would they be treated as faceless, nameless parts of a machine. They would be valued, respected, and empowered to take ownership of the company's success. Eleanor, though no longer the CEO, played an important role in the transformation. She became a spiritual advisor of sorts to Jonathan, guiding him through the difficult decisions, offering advice and wisdom from her years of experience. But she also knew that it was his time now. The company that she had once built with her own hands was now in his hands, and she had to trust that he would lead it in the right direction. The first few months were tough. There were growing pains as the company adjusted to its new leadership, to its new values. There were employees who were skeptical, who had been burned by the betrayals of the past, who had lost faith in the very ideals that Brooks Innovations was founded upon. But as the months went on, things began to change. The atmosphere in the office shifted. The fear that had once permeated the halls began to fade, replaced by a sense of hope and renewal. Employees began to speak up, to share their ideas, to take ownership of their work in a way they never had before. It wasn't just the employees who felt the change. The company itself began to flourish. The new leadership, with Jonathan at the helm, breathed fresh life into Brooks Innovations. They began to innovate again, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in the financial technology space. New ideas flowed freely, collaboration became the norm, and the company regained its reputation as a leader in innovation. As the months turned into years, Brooks Innovation slowly but surely regained its place at the top, not because of its profits, but because of the way it treated its people. It became a company that valued fairness and respect, that put people first, that was committed to not just doing business, but doing business right. And in doing so, it became a shining example of what a company could be when it embraced its values and put its people before its profits. Eleanor watched from the sidelines, proud of what her son had done, proud of the company he had helped build, a company that was now thriving, not just in terms of wealth, but in terms of its commitment to the very ideals she had once dreamed of. She knew that her legacy had been restored, not in the boardroom, but in the hearts of the employees who made the company great. And she knew that Brooks Innovations would continue to grow, not because of its bottom line, but because of the foundation of integrity and respect it was now built upon. The Final Reckoning, a journey of legacy, betrayal, and redemption. In the vast, concrete jungle of Chicago, where the hum of industry never ceased and the towering skyscrapers kissed the sky, Brooks Innovations once stood as a monument to its founders' hard work, an unshakable belief in the values of respect, equality, and innovation. For decades, Eleanor Brooks had poured every ounce of her energy into building this company from the ground up, overcoming personal and societal obstacles along the way. A black woman in a world dominated by men, Eleanor had defied all odds. She had created a thriving, billion-dollar fintech empire, a symbol of what perseverance and integrity could achieve in an industry often blind to both. But the company that had been her life's work, her legacy, was not immune to the very forces she had once fought against. As time passed and Eleanor transitioned out of the role of CEO, she handed over the reins to her son, Jonathan Brooks. At first, it seemed as though Jonathan, well-trained and capable, would carry forward the company's mission. Yet, a dark truth began to unfold. Eleanor's trusted allies, those who had once helped her shape the company's destiny, had turned against her. Greed, power, and ambition had corrupted them, and their actions were threatening to unravel everything Eleanor had built. What followed was a story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimately redemption. In a final act of defiance and determination, Eleanor went undercover, disguised as a janitor, to witness firsthand the destruction unfolding within the company. In the shadows, she gathered the evidence, piece by piece, until it became clear that the very people she had trusted were plotting not only to destroy the company, but also to betray Jonathan, her son, and her legacy. With the truth in her hands, Eleanor, now an invisible figure in her own company, had no choice but to step forward and confront those responsible for the rot inside her once proud empire. The exposure of the conspiracy was a shock to all who were involved. The very people who had once worked side by side with Eleanor, the people who had helped build Brooks Innovations, were now revealed as the architects of its downfall. Victor Daniels, the once reliable operations manager; Richard Foster, the charming yet ruthless marketing director; Paula Harris, the vice president whose ambition had turned into manipulation; and Linda Baker, the head of human resources who had turned a blind eye to the suffering of employees. These individuals had all conspired to take control of the company. They had planned to oust Jonathan, to destroy the values that had made Brooks Innovations great, and to replace it with something far darker. Yet, in the face of this betrayal, Jonathan Brooks proved that leadership wasn't just about power or money, it was about integrity. With Eleanor's guidance and the unwavering support of the few loyal employees who remained, Jonathan took a stand. He faced the board, confronted the traitors, and brought the truth into the light. The conspirators were exposed, and Brooks Innovations was given a chance to rebuild, not just its financial empire, but its very soul. The path to redemption was not easy. The company had to undergo a total overhaul. The leadership structure was changed, toxic individuals were removed, and a new emphasis was placed on respect, fairness, and innovation. Jonathan, under Eleanor's mentorship, was able to revive the company's core values, values that had been overshadowed by power struggles and personal ambition. As the company moved forward, it flourished not only in terms of profits, but also in its commitment to its people and the principles that had made it a beacon of hope for so many. The story of Brooks Innovations is not just the story of a company, it is a story of legacy, of family, and of what happens when integrity is tested by the forces of greed and power. It is a reminder that no matter how high you rise, no matter how far you come, the true measure of success lies in the values you uphold and the way you treat others. It is a story about the importance of staying true to your core beliefs, even when the world around you begins to change in ways you cannot control. Lessons learned from the journey of Eleanor and Jonathan Brooks. There are several powerful lessons we can draw from the remarkable story of Eleanor Brooks and Jonathan Brooks, lessons that resonate deeply in our own lives, especially in a world where the quest for power, success, and money often obscures the importance of values, ethics, and integrity. Let us reflect on these lessons and understand how we can apply them in our own lives. True leadership is about service, not power. Throughout Eleanor's journey, one lesson became abundantly clear. True leadership is not about exerting power over others. It's about serving the people you lead. Eleanor, as the founder of Brooks Innovations, was not interested in being revered as a powerful figure. Instead, she sought to empower others, to create a space where every employee, no matter their role, could contribute meaningfully to the company's success. Jonathan, even in the face of betrayal and personal loss, took this lesson to heart. Leadership meant listening, leading with compassion, and putting the company's core values above personal ambitions. In our own lives, we often see leadership misunderstood as a position of authority, a role that demands respect and obedience. But true leadership is about serving others, whether as a manager, a teacher, a parent, or a community leader. It's about empowering those around us and guiding them toward shared success. Values must be the foundation of everything you build. The fall of Brooks. Innovations wasn't a result of financial mismanagement or a failure in innovation. It was a breakdown in values. Victor, Richard, Paula, and Linda all sacrificed the very values that had made the company great: integrity, respect, and equality, in pursuit of personal gain. It was a stark reminder that when values are compromised, the entire foundation of an organization or even a personal life can crumble. In our own lives, it's crucial to remember that values should be the foundation of everything we do. Whether in business, relationships, or personal goals, our values must guide our decisions, our actions, and our interactions with others. Without values, we risk losing sight of what truly matters. Betrayal is painful, but it can be a catalyst for change. Eleanor's story is one of betrayal by those she trusted the most. Yet, in her darkest moment, when everything seemed lost, she found the strength to act. The betrayal became the catalyst for change, for renewal. It was a painful process, but one that ultimately led to the restoration of Brooks Innovations and the renewal of its core principles. Betrayal, whether personal or professional, can be incredibly painful. But Eleanor's story teaches us that betrayal doesn't have to be the end. It can be the spark that ignites change, that forces us to reevaluate our priorities, and that pushes us to rebuild what is broken. The key is in how we respond, whether we let it define us negatively or use it as an opportunity to grow and strengthen our resolve. The power of legacy. Eleanor's legacy was not just the company she built, but the values she instilled in her son, Jonathan. It was not about wealth or power. It was about doing things the right way, treating people with respect, and always striving for more than just profit. Jonathan's leadership was a direct reflection of the legacy Eleanor had built, and that legacy was what allowed Brooks' innovations to endure. In our own lives, we should remember that our legacy is not defined by what we accumulate, but by the impact we have on others, the way we treat people, the values we impart, and the difference we make in the world around us. The way we lead and the way we act today will shape the legacy we leave for future generations. Never stop fighting for what is right. Eleanor's journey is a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter the odds. She fought for her company, for her son, and for the employees who depended on her leadership. Even when everything seemed lost, she refused to give up. She took action, exposed the truth, and restored the company to its original values. The fight for what is right is often not an easy one. It requires courage, determination, and sometimes sacrifice. But Eleanor's story shows us that it's worth it. Standing up for what's right may not always bring immediate rewards, but in the long run, it will bring fulfillment and peace. Applying the lessons of Eleanor and Jonathan to our own lives. The lessons learned from Eleanor and Jonathan Brooks are not just applicable in the world of business. They resonate deeply in every aspect of life, from our relationships to our careers to our personal development. Here's how we can apply these lessons in today's world. Serve others. In whatever capacity we lead, whether at work, in our communities, or in our families, we should remember that leadership is about service. When we focus on lifting others up, we build stronger, more collaborative, and compassionate environments. Hold true to your values. It's easy to get lost in the noise of success, competition, and ambition, but we must always anchor ourselves in our values. Integrity, honesty, and respect should guide every decision we make, whether in business or in life. Embrace change in the face of adversity. Life will undoubtedly present us with challenges, betrayal, setbacks, disappointments. But instead of letting these define us negatively, we should use them as opportunities for growth and change. The way we respond to adversity shapes the course of our lives. Create a legacy of impact. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? It's not about the wealth you accumulate or the status you achieve, but the difference you make in the lives of others. We have the power to create a legacy that outlives us, one that's built on love, compassion, and positive action. Stand up for what's right. Whether it's standing up for someone in need, calling out injustice, or making tough decisions, we must never shy away from doing what's right. Our integrity is worth fighting for. If you found the story of Eleanor Brooks and Jonathan Brooks inspiring, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that empowers, educates, and inspires. Don't miss out on the next story that could change the way you see the world and help you live with greater purpose. Hit the subscribe button and join our community of like-minded individuals. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to sharing more impactful stories with you soon.